Hello and welcome to another Back to the Future as part of Agri-TechE's 10th birthday celebration. I'm here today with Aleks Kowalski, who's the project director of SEAD Artists. Aleks, hello, nice to see you.
Hello, Belinda, nice to meet you too.
So Aleks, let's start off. SEAD Artists, what does SEAD Artists represent, particularly for agriculture?
Sure, so SEAD Artist is the kind of culmination of a journey within the drone industry. My background is from manned aviation, but when a colleague of mine recently became one of the first organisations in the UK to be able to spray with drones, it then got me thinking, how else could drones be used in an agricultural perspective, but from an end-to-end perspective? So that means from pre-intervention through to application, but then also some of the verification and validation, especially because it's already a kind of net zero technology.
So drones have been kind of in and around agriculture for the last decade, but they've been on quite the journey, so to speak. Do you want to just talk us through the history of drone use over the last decade and sort of where the stumbling blocks have been?
Sure. So from a kind of diffusion of innovation curve, there was the great hype 10 years ago that drones were going to be the next big thing. And the problem was that a lot of people entered the market, made a lot of promises that drones could solve everything. And therefore, there's been this kind of plateau of disappointment when there are aviation regulations that say drones can only fly so far. There was still then the idea that just the drones could, for example, capture visual data or spectral data. How would you process that data? How would you get it as part of a kind of end-to-end chain? So from gathering the data through to actually giving it some useful insight. And it's taken quite a long time for industry from the drone perspective to work out how to do that effectively. So kind of we're at the next phase where we can put that together.
And you've been working with the regulator as well for quite some time, haven't you? How have those conversations gone?
Yeah, so the regulator itself is also learning. Obviously now they are in charge of the aviation regulation separate from the European community itself, from the European Union post-Brexit. So they themselves are having to upskill from a personnel and from an understanding perspective. So they are issuing more and more advanced regulations that will allow drone usage, for example, at low altitudes. The likelihood of coming into conflict with another manned aircraft is extremely low. And so that's a piece of work that's recently been released by the regulator, and it's the kind of regulatory advancement that we can take advantage of here at SEAD Artists.
So clearly things are starting to accelerate. If we can just look forward to the next 10 years, where do you think the industry will be in terms of its drone usage? Presumably will spraying from drones be routine and commonplace?
Yeah, so there's two parts here. First of all, from an aviation perspective, the government has issued something called the Future of Flight Action Plan that was issued in March 2024, so earlier this year, which actually gives a 10-year vision up to past beyond 2030 on how this is going to be all introduced for multiple drone operations. Then from a separate SEAD artist perspective, I can see drones being used in about 4 different areas. One is the pre-intervention work that we already see today. So how do you do multispectral imaging, but at scale? So not just 500 meters, but 15, 20 kilometers. Then you would have the application. So for example, the drone spraying, we already have drones above 100 liters in payload. So we can do that in long distances. Then you've got the verification and validation. So there are colleagues who are already working with drones that can detect ammonia, that could detect CHG or carbon dioxide particulates. So we can start doing a verification and validation. And the final part would be around ground-based measurements. So rather than having a drone, maybe 20, 30 people measuring water tables, can a drone go and gather all that information in one go as well? Hence meets the full end cycle, data-driven, and then the agronomists and the agricultural industry can actually make use of that information.
And I guess one final question, what needs to happen? What's on your wish list to make this a reality over the next decade or even sooner?
Yes, one of the big problems, as I mentioned 10 years ago, is it became a bit of a free-for-all with everybody coming in saying we can provide these services. And I can imagine that would confuse a lot of people within the agricultural industry. So what we're trying to do with SEAD Arts is to say, where is a one-stop shop? Where's a vehicle where if I want to know either pre-intervention, post-intervention, that there's a resource that we can go to that can steer us in the right direction to the right companies? That's where I think SEAD Artists can really help as a kind of steering point for the industry, where to go and who to talk to.
I mean, it's clear that this is a technology that's hugely enabling for agriculture. It was one of the first agri-tech innovations that people were talking about, certainly when we started. And some of the farmers had a bit of a dabble in it and didn't really know what they were doing and didn't maximise the potential. So it sounds as if, thanks to thinking like that going on in Seed Artists, we really are poised to unlock the potential of these vehicles.
I think so, yes. And there are so many different ways they can be used. I mean, one of the key parts for me is the idea of what I would call the advancement of net zero. You don't have heavy machinery. You are already kind of electric generated. The range at which you can fly is increased. But also, I would say now there's a lot of people like myself from conventional manned aviation, where we've got our kind of insights from an aviation regulation perspective, so we can obviate that problem, which was obviously the handicap for the last 5 to 10 years.
Brilliant. Aleks, we look forward to seeing the progress. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Belinda.